Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of absolute precision.
Right, yeah. Like, it should be black and white.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It feels almost like engineering or something. Like
Yeah.
you break your arm, the X-ray shows that jagged white line against the black background.
And the doctor just points to the screen.
Yeah, they just point and say, there it is. That's the problem. That's exactly what's wrong.
It's binary. I mean, the bone is broken or it isn't broken.
Yeah.
We naturally crave that kind of visible, easily categorized certainty.
We really do. But then you step into the world of macroeconomics.
Oh, yeah. That's a whole different ballgame.
Right. You step into structural development and labor markets, and suddenly that X-ray machine is completely useless.
Totally useless. You're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is incredibly murky.
Yeah, the symptoms of a struggling economy are literally everywhere. I mean, you can see them on the streets, right?
Absolutely. You see the informal vendors, the unemployment.
But the root causes, they are just incredibly adept at hiding behind these comforting, easily digestible stories.
They really are. And that is exactly what we are stepping right into today.
Welcome, everyone. If you're listening, get ready, because we are on a mission today. We are going to examine a really fascinating, deeply researched critique of the three dominant economic narratives regarding unemployment and economic growth.
Yeah, and we are focusing specifically on a massive case study on Morocco for this deep dive.
And the sources we're pulling from today are just incredible.
They really are. We're drawing on some incredibly robust data. We have the latest numbers from the OECD 2024 Morocco survey.
Right.
We have insights from the World Bank. And we're using some seriously heavy-hitting economic frameworks from structural economists, specifically Ha-Joon and Antonio Andreoni.
So for you listening, whether you are analyzing national economies or looking at corporate structures or, even just evaluating the trajectory of your own industry, the stakes here are actually pretty high.
Definitely. Because we all do this. We all have this dangerous tendency to fall back on comfortable, sort of sticky narratives to explain away systemic failures.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
We love a story that lets us off the hook.
We really do. And when a country faces stubbornly high unemployment and, sluggish growth, the international community, policymakers, and even just the general public,
They all tend to repeat the exact same three stories on a loop.
every single time.
Right. So the first story is that the workers simply have the wrong skills.
Yep. The classic skills mismatch.
Exactly. The second story is that the state just needs to fund more micro-entrepreneurs, like tiny businesses.
The whole small is beautiful thing.
Right. And the third narrative is that the government is actually investing plenty of capital, but the execution and management of those infrastructure projects is just terribly inefficient.
Bad management, basically.
Yeah. And on the surface, those three statements sound incredibly reasonable.
They do. They completely masquerade as common sense.
But when you actually look at the brutal, fascinating data underneath, it tells a completely different story.
A vastly different story. One that really requires us to rethink how we diagnose failure in the first place.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start by tearing down the first of these massive myths.
The skills mismatch scapegoat.
Yeah. So the narrative goes that graduate unemployment is sky high simply because universities are teaching the wrong things.
Right. The idea is that the degrees aren't aligned with the market.
Exactly. They say the youth don't have the technical capabilities that modern companies actually demand.
But think about the immense, emotional and political satisfaction of that narrative.
Oh, it's huge.
If you are a government minister or an institutional leader, the skills mismatch story is an absolute gift.
Because it shifts the blame.
Completely. It shifts the burden of the economic failure entirely away from the growth model itself.
Right. Away from the state's industrial policy.
And away from the corporate sector. It places the blame squarely on the education system and, frankly, the students themselves.
It's the perfect deflection. If the economy isn't producing jobs, well, it's because the graduates didn't study the right STEM fields.
Right. It's their fault for studying humanities or whatever.
Exactly. But it contains this massive hidden assumption, doesn't it?
Yeah, what the structural frameworks call the supply-side bias.
Supply-side bias. Okay, break that down for me. What does that actually mean?
So this narrative assumes that the demand side, meaning the private sector, is perfectly healthy.
Oh, I see.
It paints this picture of a dynamic, innovation-hungry private sector that is just waiting, practically begging to hire thousands of people.
If only those pesky graduates had the exact right coding skills, right?
Exactly. Or the perfect engineering certificates. The private sector is treated as this frictionless machine that is merely lacking the correct cogs.
But the OECD data kind of blows that up, doesn't it?
It completely shatters that illusion just with a few basic data points.
Okay, hit me with the numbers.
Every single year, around 400,000 people enter the labor market.
400,000.
Okay. But the annual net job creation since the year 2000 has only averaged about 110,000.
Wait, really? Let me make sure I heard that right. 400,000 enter, but only 110,000 jobs are created.
Yep. That is a structural chasm.
That is wild. I mean, 400,000 people walking out into the market and only 110,000 jobs waiting for them.
The math just does not work out.
No. I mean, you could have the most perfectly trained, impeccably matched graduates in the history of the world.
Right. They could all have PhDs in exactly what the market wants.
Yeah, you could unleash 400,000 absolute geniuses with perfectly tailored resumes into that economy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's simple arithmetic.
290,000 of them are still going to be unemployed.
Exactly. 290,000 people are mathematically guaranteed to not find a job.
It exposes the sheer mathematical impossibility of training our way out of a structural deficit.
It really makes me think of training pilots. Like, imagine we decide our aviation industry is failing, right?
Right.
So we aggressively train thousands of new pilots. We put them through rigorous simulators. We give them top-tier credentials.
We make them the best pilots in the world.
Right. But we don't actually manufacture or buy any airplanes.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Those highly trained pilots are still just going to be sitting in the terminal. The issue isn't a pilot problem. It's a plane problem.
That is a brilliant analogy. We are obsessing over the supply of labor, the pilots, while completely ignoring the massive deficit in structural demand. The planes.
Yeah, and Ha-Joon emphasizes this exact point, right?
He does. In his structural critique, he calls it macro blindness.
Macro blindness.
Yeah, we see neoliberal and institutional forces constantly zooming way in on these micro interventions.
Like what kind of micro intervention?
Oh, things like funding employability boot camps.
Yeah.
Or tweaking university curricula. Or, sponsoring resume building workshop.
I mean, those sound nice, but...
They are nice. But you cannot fix mass unemployment with micro-interventions when the macro structure of the economy is fundamentally failing to generate complex demand.
It's an analytical downgrade.
Exactly. We are essentially applying bandages to a patient suffering from internal bleeding.
You're rearranging the furniture in the living room to fix a massive hole in the roof.
Yes, that's exactly it.
So to understand why those planes, jobs don't exist, we really have to confront the reality of informality.
This is where it gets really interesting. The OECD data highlights a staggering statistic that completely reframes the demand side of this whole equation.
Okay, what is it?
There are an estimated 1.7 million informal firms operating in this economy.
Wow, 1.7 million.
And furthermore, 70% of all entrepreneurs are operating entirely informally, off the books.
70%. So for you, the listener, I want you to imagine stepping into that environment.
Right, put yourself in their shoes.
You've gone to university, you've earned your degree, and you are trying to secure a formal, high-paying corporate job. Something with Social Security and a clear career ladder.
But the economy you are stepping into is overwhelmingly dominated by millions of unregulated micro-operations.
Tiny street kiosks. Off-the-books vendors.
Exactly. And those informal operators aren't just existing alongside the formal sector, like peacefully coexisting.
No.
No, they're actively suffocating it.
Suffocating the formal sector. How does that work?
Well, the data shows these informal businesses have a 20 to 40% cost advantage over formal businesses.
Wait, a 20 to 40% advantage? Just because they're informal?
Yeah, because they are dodging taxes, they're ignoring labor laws, and they're completely skipping Social Security contributions.
So the formal businesses, the ones that actually provide the high-quality jobs that these graduates want?
They are struggling to compete on price.
Oh, that makes total sense. Because they have to pay taxes and follow the laws.
Exactly. And because they can't compete, they can't scale up. And because they can't scale, they don't hire.
Wow. So you can possess every skill the market supposedly demands?
You can be the perfect candidate.
But if the demand side is overwhelmingly dominated by low productivity informal activities, those high-quality formal jobs literally just do not exist for you to fill.
They don't. The skills mismatch might be a real issue at the margins. I mean, the OECD does note that basic education needs improvement.
Right. Nobody's saying education is perfect.
Exactly. But it is entirely secondary. It is absolutely not the binding constraint.
We're focusing on the paint job, while the engine is literally missing.
Exactly.
So if those formal high-paying jobs aren't being created, those 400,000 people entering the market still have to survive, right?
Yeah, they don't just disappear.
They have to eat, they have to pay rent,
Yeah.
and their sheer desperation to generate some kind of income sets up the second massive myth we need to deconstruct.
The deep, pervasive romanticization of the micro-entrepreneur.
Okay, let's unpack this one. The small is beautiful trap.
Oh man, this is perhaps the most globally pervasive economic narrative of the last 4 decades.
We hear it constantly, don't we? From development agencies, from politicians.
Over and over. The idea is that supporting micro, small, and medium enterprises, what the sources refer to as SMEs or TPEs, the very small businesses, that this is the ultimate engine of economic growth.
Right. The logic seems to assume that if we just shower them with a little microcredit, maybe a few tax breaks, and stick them in a business incubator,
They will magically and organically blossom into a thriving engine of national prosperity.
it really taps into this deep, inherent entrepreneurship romance that we all kind of share.
It does. It feels incredibly inclusive and democratic to say, hey, everyone can be an entrepreneur.
It does. It also feeds on this really natural anti-big business reflex we have.
Yeah, we often view massive corporations or state-backed national champions with a lot of suspicion.
Right. We see them as oligarchic or corrupt or just exploitative. So financially backing the little guy, it just feels morally superior.
It feels like the right thing to do.
But what's fascinating here is the data. The data behind the little guy completely shatters that romantic illusion.
It really does. According to the sources, 91% of active firms in this economy have 10 or fewer employees.
21%.
And a truly shocking 88% have 3 or fewer employees.
88% have 3 or fewer.
Yeah.
Think about the scale of that fragmentation for a second. 88% of the entire corporate landscape consists of 3 people or fewer working together.
Politicians and international development agencies, they look at a statistic like that and they frequently misinterpret it as a massive success.
They do. They point to the sheer volume of business registrations and they say, look at all this entrepreneurial dynamism. The startup culture is thriving.
But the structural economists point out that this is a catastrophic misdiagnosis.
Why?
Because this isn't Schumpeterian innovation. These aren't like brilliant tech startups biding their time in a garage until they become the next major global platform.
No, this is necessity self-employment.
Exactly. It's pure survival.
People are creating these tiny one-person businesses, selling phone cards on the corner, doing minor off-the-books repairs, simply because the formal wage jobs we just talked about are missing.
Right. We look at a man on a tiny wooden raft in the middle of the ocean, and we congratulate him on his burgeoning maritime shipping company.
Oh, that's such a good way to put it.
When the reality is his cruise ship sank, and he's just desperately trying not to drown.
That raft analogy is so vital because it really shifts our understanding of capacity.
It does. We tend to view every micro business as a seedling that just needs a little time and a little water to grow into a massive tree.
But a raft is not structurally designed to cross an ocean. I don't care how hard you paddle.
Exactly. Giving that micro-entrepreneur a slightly better paddle, like, say, a $500 microcredit loan, or putting them in a weekend seminar on basic accounting.
It does not magically transform a raft into a cargo ship.
It just doesn't.
Because the environment they are operating in is completely saturated. If you give a small loan to that tiny kiosk selling phone cards, they are still operating on a street corner that already has 50 other tiny kiosks selling the exact same phone cards.
To the exact same limited pool of local consumers.
Right. There is no structural path to scale there.
It's like trying to make a donkey win a Formula One race.
Okay, run with that.
Well, you can feed the donkey the best oats in the world, you can give it top-tier medical care, and you can train it every single day.
You can fully optimize that donkey.
You can optimize the donkey, but it will never, ever outpace a race car.
No.
Because the fundamental design and the capabilities of the organism are entirely different. An informal repair shop can certainly become slightly more organized, but it completely lacks the technological capability, the management structure, and the capital to suddenly transform into a high-productivity exporter.
So multiplying these micro shops is actually a symptom of a sick economy, not the medicine.
Exactly. If you visit a city and you see thousands of people standing at traffic lights, selling single bottles of water or cheap plastic toys.
You don't interpret that as an innovative entrepreneurial ecosystem.
No, You recognize that the formal job system is leaking massively, and people are desperately improvising just to survive.
So treating the proliferation of microfirms as the solution is completely confusing the fever with the cure.
Exactly.
And if 88% of firms are these tiny, three-person or less operations, the macroeconomic consequence is what the sources call the missing middle.
Yes, the missing middle. And this creates a massive productivity gap. The data clearly shows that large enterprises are about 5.5 times more productive than microfirms.
5.5 times. To put that in perspective for you listening, two different engines can burn the exact same amount of fuel, meaning labor and capital, but the larger formal engine produces 5.5 times the horsepower.
Right. When an economy has a missing middle, the growth ladders are physically broken.
It's like a school system where everyone is enrolled in the first grade, and there's a prestigious university at the very top for a tiny elite, but there are absolutely no middle schoolers or high schools anywhere.
That's a great way to look at it. The staircase literally has missing steps.
Yeah. How does a three-person firm ever reach the productivity of a massive corporation if there is no mid-sized tier to transition through?
They don't. Imagine trying to organize a highly competitive National Football League, but 90% of the teams only have 3 players on the field.
That would be a disaster.
Right. And it doesn't matter how much coaching you give those 3-player teams. It doesn't matter how many subsidized cleats or training camps you provide.
You will never, ever be able to compete against international teams until you actually consolidate those players and build full 11-player rosters.
Exactly.
Which raises a really critical, kind of uncomfortable question.
Okay, what's up?
If small three-person firms are mathematically incapable of driving macroeconomic growth, and we desperately need these large, highly productive, 5.5 times more efficient champion firms to actually compete globally.
Right.
Why is the international development community so afraid of building them? Like, why the constant fetishization of the SME to the exclusion of the large corporation?
That's the million-dollar question. And it traces directly back to that anti-big business reflex we discussed earlier.
The fear of oligarchy.
Yes, large firms, especially in developing or middle-income economies, are heavily associated with oligarchy, monopolies, and wealthy families capturing state resources for rent-seeking behavior.
And those are valid historical fears, to be fair.
They are very valid. But Andreoni and Chang introduce a really crucial distinction here. They argue that the alternative to captured corrupt big business is not eternal smallness.
Say that again. That is a profound paradigm shift. The alternative to corrupt big business is not eternal smallness.
Right. We just naturally assume that if big business is bad, then small business must be pure and good.
Right. But purity doesn't export complex goods.
Exactly. The structural solution is building capable domestic champions, but instituting strict, ironclad rules that prevent that state capture.
You need large and mid-sized firms because they are the primary sites of research and development.
They have the balance sheets to actually absorb the risk of innovation?
Yeah, they are the ones with the logistical capacity to export and integrate into highly demanding global value chains.
You cannot build a national aerospace industry by subsidizing thousands of independent bicycle mechanics.
That's such a good point. Bicycles are excellent for local mobility, sure. But to participate in long-distance global trade, you need to build aircraft.
You do.
And to build those aircraft, to construct these large champion firms and piece together a structured economic hierarchy, you need massive public investment.
Oh, absolutely.
You need deep water ports, high-speed rail, fiber optic networks. You need massive capital deployment.
And this leads us directly to the third myth.
Right, because the reality is the government is investing. They're pouring money into the system, but the growth isn't following.
Welcome to the public investment paradox.
Okay, let's get into it. The third pervasive narrative states that the government actually invests a massive amount of money, but the return on investment, the ROI, is dismally low simply because of bad execution.
Right. The story always points to bureaucratic delays, poor project management, and localized corruption.
The sources refer to this as the implementation failure bias.
And again, it is a highly seductive narrative, particularly for technocrats and, international management consultants.
Because it relies on the assumption that the state is actually investing in the right strategic assets.
Yeah.
And the only flaw is that the civil service is just too incompetent to execute the blueprints effectively.
It reduces deep systemic economic failures to a mere need for better project management software.
Or maybe, more streamlined public-private partnership frameworks.
Right. It assumes the vision is perfect, but the hands are just clumsy.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The OECD data complicates this narrative significantly.
It does, because Morocco's infrastructure is actually rated as relatively good by regional standards.
Right. They have remarkably high public investment rates. The public sector completely dominates capital formation in the country.
They are successfully building the massive toll roads, the deepwater ports, the high-speed rail lines.
Concrete is actually being poured, and the projects are genuinely being completed. So if the infrastructure physically exists, the implementation failure bias falls apart.
Exactly. It can't just be that they are slow at building.
So what's the actual problem?
Well, Andrioni and Chang's work on structural interdependencies provides the actual diagnosis here.
Structural interdependencies. Let's break that down.
The core problem isn't just how the money is being spent or managed. The deeper structural problem is what is being funded and who it is actually built for.
Okay, let's dissect what is actually being funded then, because a massive proportion of public money is pouring into infrastructure specifically designed for enclave FDI.
Foreign direct investment.
Right, or it's going into non-tradable sectors like commercial real estate and luxury construction.
Let's look at the enclave FDI first, because this is crucial.
Okay, walk me through it.
So imagine a massive foreign multinational. Let's say it's a European automaker or an aerospace manufacturer.
Okay.
They decide to set up an assembly plant in the country. The government, obviously eager for the headline of attracting foreign investment, builds them a beautiful dedicated port.
Right, and a shiny new highway connecting the factory straight to the coast.
Exactly. And they give them a dedicated tax-free industrial zone.
I mean, on paper, that reads like an absolute triumph of economic policy. The government invested in infrastructure and a global giant arrived. It sounds like a win.
It does, but the enclave nature of this setup is the hidden poison here.
Why?
Because this foreign company operates almost entirely disconnected from the local domestic economy. They import their high-tech parts and specialized components from their existing suppliers abroad. They assemble those parts in the new factory using relatively low-cost local labor, and then they immediately export the finished product back out through that shiny new port.
So the structural linkages to the rest of the local domestic firms are, what, incredibly weak.
If they exist at all, the technological knowledge doesn't spill over to local engineers. The domestic suppliers aren't being forced to upgrade their quality standards because the foreign firm simply bypasses them completely.
Wow, so the factory operates like this island of high productivity, completely isolated within a vast sea of local informality.
Exactly, it's an enclave. And then you have the other massive sink for public investment, which is non-tradable sectors.
Like real estate.
Right, pouring capital into luxury apartments, massive shopping malls, or resort complexes.
I mean, that certainly creates a temporary boom in construction jobs.
It does, but it doesn't increase the country's technological capacity. You can't export a shopping mall to Germany or China.
No, you definitely can't.
It doesn't generate foreign exchange, and it doesn't drive long-term structural transformation.
So the structural interdependency is broken. The infrastructure doesn't serve the domestic productive base.
Right.
It's like, imagine you decide you want to become a world-class professional esports gamer.
Okay.
You go out and you spend $10,000 on the absolute best state-of-the-art computer hardware. You buy the fastest processor on the market, top-tier graphics cards, liquid cooling, the works.
Sounds expensive.
Very. And that hardware represents the public infrastructure.
Yeah.
You know, the ports, the high-speed rail, the industrial zones. It looks incredible.
But hardware alone doesn't run a program.
Exactly. You refuse to install an operating system. Or like, you only install a basic game of solitaire.
That's painful to even think about.
Right. But without the software, which in a macro economy means capability building, local supply chain integration, aggressive technology transfer, and forcing domestic firms into those value chains, that $10,000 hardware is basically just a very expensive glowing paperweight.
It's a paperweight. The ROI isn't low because the highway was built poorly. The ROI is low because the highway only connects a foreign factory to an export port, entirely bypassing the domestic economy.
It is a fundamental structural misalignment.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay, so we've now successfully dismantled all three comforting illusions.
We have.
Let's review. The skills mismatch is a secondary issue. Training pilots for non-existent planes does not generate demand.
Right.
The micro-entrepreneur romance is a deadly trap. It's survival self-employment, masking a catastrophic missing middle.
Yep.
And the low return on public investment isn't just a failure of middle management. It's a structural flaw of investing in isolated hardware without cultivating the software of domestic linkages.
Perfect summary.
But, knowing what doesn't work is really only half the battle.
Right. We need solutions.
Exactly. If an economy is trapped in these muddy waters, what is the actual structural playbook for getting out? How do you re-engineer an entire national economy to actually build those missing middle steps and integrate the hardware with the software?
Well, the alternative playbook requires a massive and, quite frankly, uncomfortable shift in economic philosophy.
Uncomfortable how?
We have to completely abandon the focus on the quantity of growth and obsess over the quality of growth.
The quality of growth.
Right. The first major policy shift the sources outline is moving away from what economists call factor accumulation growth.
Factor accumulation growth. Okay, what does that mean?
This is the old model. It's essentially just trying to force more people into the labor pool or desperately trying to attract more raw foreign capital regardless of where it actually goes.
Just piling up resources.
Exactly. Instead, the focus must shift entirely to total factor productivity.
Total factor productivity, or TFP.
Yes, TFT-driven structural transformation.
Okay, break that down for me in plain language. What is TFP?
So total factor productivity essentially measures how intelligently and intensely you are utilizing the resources you already have.
Okay, so it's not just throwing more money at the problem.
Exactly, or forcing the population to work longer hours or digging more raw materials out of the ground.
It's about organizing the economy so that each hour worked and each dollar invested produces vastly more complex value.
Precisely. And you achieve that by deliberately shifting the economy away from basic extraction or low-end assembly and moving into sectors that actually learn and grow over time.
The text refers to these as sectors with increasing returns, right?
Yes. Diversified manufacturing, information and communication technology, ICT, complex engineering, and knowledge-intensive agro-industry.
So a government has to actively, unapologetically choose to prioritize sectors where technology, learning, and efficiency compound year after year.
They have to pick winners, basically. But to shift into those complex sectors, you have to fix the firm structure first.
Right. You have to address the 88% of firms that only have 3 employees.
Exactly. Which brings us back to our plants analogy.
Oh, yeah, the seedlings.
Right. The old failing methodology, which is blanket support for every single tiny TPE and microfirm, it's like taking a single watering can and trying to equally distribute water to 1,000 tiny seedlings jammed into one massively crowded pot.
They're all fiercely competing for the exact same limited soil and sunlight.
And none of them have the resources to grow big, so they all stay stunted.
It's just a pot full of tiny, dying plants.
Right. So the alternative playbook demands a greenhouse approach. You have to repot the plants.
Repot the plants.
A state must strategically select specific high-potential plants, move them into much larger pots with better soil, and deliberately, aggressively cultivate them until they grow into massive oak trees.
Okay, I love that analogy, but the sources detail the specific mechanics of how a government actually goes about repotting these firms, right?
They do, because right now, the regulatory environment and the tax codes actively punish companies for attempting to grow.
We talked about the missing middle earlier. And one of the primary reasons firms intentionally stay small or deliberately hide in the informal sector is because of steep, punitive corporate tax schedules.
The tax cliffs.
The tax cliffs.
Imagine a mid-sized business that is actually doing quite well. Let's say they have 8 employees, their product is solid, and the owner wants to expand to 20 employees and buy new machinery.
Sounds like exactly what the economy needs.
It is, but the moment their officially reported revenue crosses a certain arbitrary threshold, their corporate tax rate spikes dramatically.
Wow.
It might jump from, say, 10% up to 30 or 35% overnight.
That is insane. Suddenly, the math of growth becomes completely toxic.
It does. It actually makes more financial sense for the owner to secretly open a second, entirely separate small business under a cousin's name.
Right. Or just operate the entire expansion off the books in the informal shadow economy, rather than formally growing the main firm into a transparent mid-sized company.
The system literally incentivizes fragmentation. They are terrified to grow.
Because if they grow, they get punished.
Exactly. So the playbook mandates that the state must smooth out those tax schedules.
You have to reduce the burden on growing SMEs, lower the marginal tax rates on those crucial first steps of scaling.
You have to remove the cliffs. But, and this is absolutely vital, you keep those tax incentives strictly conditional on the firm formalizing, registering its workers, and operating transparently.
You trade tax leniency for formalization.
Exactly. But the concept of reparing also implies selection.
Right.
The expert sources, particularly the World Bank data, evaluating SME upgrading programs, they heavily emphasize that state support must be selective.
Selective. Meaning effective SME support cannot be blanket support.
Right. As the text explicitly states, not everyone gets everything.
Not everyone gets everything. I mean, this has to be an incredibly tough pill to swallow for policymakers.
Oh, it is, because politicians are driven by election cycles. They want to be universally loved by all their constituents.
Of course. And giving out microloans to everyone looks great on a campaign flyer.
Exactly. But selective industrial policy is brutal. It is, however, the only fair way to achieve macroeconomic scale.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second, because morally, that sounds incredibly harsh.
Go for it.
Isn't it cruel for the state to look at the survival micro-businesses?
Yeah.
You know, a guy with the tiny kiosk, the woman selling water at the intersection, say, sorry, you don't fit our high productivity profile, so you don't get the upgrading grant.
Right.
Aren't we just completely abandoning the most vulnerable people in the economy?
That is exactly the most common political objection to structural transformation. But the answer is no, you do not abandon them. But you completely change the category of support you provide.
Change the category. How so?
The policy playbook forces a strict bifurcation. The survival microfirms, the RAFs they receive, support that is entirely geared towards basic livelihoods and social protection.
Oh.
You give them simplified flat taxes, basic digital registration, and access to national health insurance. You provide a robust safety net to keep them from drowning.
Right, you make sure they survive.
But you must stop treating them as the engine of economic growth.
You don't try to use a safety net as a trampoline.
That's a great way to put it.
It's not built for it, and someone is going to break their legs trying.
Exactly. The growth-oriented support, the massive capital grants, the intensive capability training, the subsidized access to major supply chains that is ruthlessly reserved for the SMEs that demonstrate real upgrading potential.
And that selective upgrading must combine two elements simultaneously, right?
Yes. Capability strengthening, like quality management and innovation training, and guaranteed market access.
Market access is the key there. You don't just train these firms in a vacuum.
No, you don't give a medium-sized auto parts manufacturer a 3-day workshop on lean management, hand them a certificate, and then just wish them luck against global competitors.
Right, that's back to training pilots without planes.
Exactly. Instead, you connect them directly to the lead firm.
How does that work in practice?
Well, you take those massive multinational enclave companies we mentioned earlier, the ones currently importing all their parts, and you structurally integrate the local SME into their supply chain.
You force the connection.
Yes. You help the local firm secure long-term supply contracts. You give them a specific, guaranteed race to run in, provided they meet the quality standards.
But to have big races, you really need big domestic champions to drive the pace.
You do.
We mentioned earlier that an economy needs large domestic firms to conduct R&D and compete globally. But we also acknowledge the massive risk of those firms becoming corrupt monopolies that just extract rent from the local population.
Right. State capture.
Exactly. So how does a state build a massive corporate giant without creating a monster it can't control?
This is where the text introduces the absolute cornerstone concept of successful industrial policy. It's drawn heavily from Ha-Joon Chang's analysis of East Asian economic miracles.
Okay, what's the concept?
Reciprocal control mechanisms.
Reciprocal control. This is where the state acts less like a charity and more like a demanding venture capitalist.
That's precisely. Under reciprocal control, the state decides it urgently needs to build a domestic champion in a strategic sector. Let's say the pharmaceutical industry, or green energy manufacturing, or digital services.
Okay.
The state provides unbelievable levels of support to this chosen domestic firm.
What kind of support?
They provide patient capital, which is long-term, low-interest financing that doesn't demand immediate quarterly returns. They build highly specialized industrial parks just for them. They grant them lucrative, strategic public procurement contracts.
I mean, that is a massive, deliberate transfer of wealth and advantage from the public to a private entity.
It is, and in most systems, that exact scenario is where the corruption happens.
Because the firm just takes the money, builds a lazy monopoly, crushes local competition, and then profits off charging the local population exorbitant prices.
Exactly. But under reciprocal control, that state support is utterly conditional. It is an ironclad, performance-based contract.
Okay, what are the conditions?
The state says, we will give you all of this capital and protection, But UT, you must meet strict, externally verifiable performance targets.
Like what?
You must export a certain percentage of your goods to global markets. That proves they are actually internationally competitive, not just domestically protected.
Right. What else?
You must invest a set percentage of revenue into technological R&D, and you must create a specific, audited number of high-quality formal jobs.
And what if the firm gets lazy? What if they take the patient capital but fail to export? What happens then?
The support has a strict sunset clause.
A sunset clause.
Yes. The state simply cuts off the cheap credit, removes the import tariffs that were protecting them from foreign competition, and pulls the public procurement contracts.
Wow. No more unconditional rent extraction.
None. It is a ruthless discipline mechanism.
It's reciprocal. I get it. The state provides the ultimate environment to thrive, and the firm owes the state structural economic transformation.
Exactly. If you don't deliver the software, we take back the hardware.
That's brilliant. And this discipline completely rewrites how public investment must shift, too.
It does. Going back to our gaming PC analogy, instead of just building another generic highway to artificially boost short-term GDP numbers for the next election cycle.
The government needs to invest heavily in technological infrastructure.
Yes. Soft infrastructure.
Right, like testing labs, metrology centers, R&D hubs that are aligned specifically with those priority clusters.
Exactly. If the state wants to build an aerospace domestic champion, they don't just build a road to the airport.
They build state-of-the-art wind tunnels and advanced engineering schools right next to the industrial park.
Yes, because these are shared capabilities that domestic SMEs can rent.
Ah, I see.
A mid-sized manufacturer might not be able to afford a $10 million materials testing lab to certify their parts for export to Europe.
Of course not.
But if the state builds that lab as a public asset, the SME can use it to upgrade their product.
That is how you install the operating system onto the hardware. You build the connective tissue. Okay, so we've covered the firm structure, we've covered the investment paradox, and the role of the state.
We covered a lot.
But we have to bring this back down to the human level, the labor side.
Right, the pilots.
Exactly. Because we still have 400,000 people entering the market every single year. How do we actually pull people out of that 70% informal sector?
Well, we have to interrogate why people stay in the informal sector to begin with.
Why do they?
They stay because the regulatory cost of formalizing is just too high for the employer, and the formal jobs available don't pay enough to make it worth the employee's while to pay income tax.
Right.
The structural playbook demands that the state intervene on the demand side to make formal jobs financially irresistible to both parties.
How does the state sweeten the deal enough to overcome a 40% cost advantage?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a huge gap to close.
It is. You do it through targeted, aggressive fiscal intervention.
Give me an example.
If the state wants these newly repotted mid-sized firms and these heavily disciplined domestic champions to hire people legally and formally, they have to subsidize the transition.
Okay.
This means implementing targeted payroll tax reductions specifically for low-wage formal jobs. It means the government providing time-bound wage subsidies.
So imagine the state approaching a growing SME and saying, hey, we know you want to expand. If you hire your first 5 formal on-the-books employees this year, the state will cover 30% of their wages for the first 18 months.
Exactly. You actively shrink the cost advantage of the informal sector. You make it cheaper to operate formally than to hide in the shadows.
But you also need enforcement, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
You combine those carrots with the progressive enforcement of formalization, the sticks.
You link the National Social Registry with employment services.
You make digital invoicing mandatory across the entire supply chain to relentlessly squeeze the gray market.
And this brings us completely full circle.
It really does.
Because we started this whole deep dive dissecting the skills mismatch myth.
Right.
And how training pilots without planes was just a colossal waste of resources.
Yes.
But now, under this new playbook, we are actually building the planes.
We are building the planes. We have disciplined domestic champions. We have upgraded, repotted SMEs that are integrated into global supply chains.
So what happens to the pilots now?
Well, now the training actually works.
Because there are planes to fly.
Exactly. Because it is no longer generic supply-side guessing, the playbook dictates that the state co-designs the training curriculum directly with the specific industries that are legally bound by their reciprocal control contracts to hire.
So you stop funding generic employability boot camps.
Completely.
Instead, the state goes to the domestic digital services champion who just received patient capital
Yeah.
and says, what exact software architecture are you building over the next 3 years?
Okay, we are going to train 500 local youths in that exact architecture.
And as part of the sunset clause on your state funding, you are legally obligated to hire 300 of them the moment they graduate.
You eliminate the mismatch entirely. You don't just train people and hope the frictionless market absorbs them.
The training is directly contractually tied to guaranteed hiring in strategic sectors.
Education reform becomes a precise complement to industrial policy rather than a failing substitute for it.
Wow. We have covered a tremendous amount of ground here today.
We really have.
We've looked at the X-ray of a national economy and realized the bones aren't broken, the gravity in the room is just turned off.
That's a great way to summarize it. If we synthesize everything we've extracted from the OECD, the World Bank, and the structural frameworks, the core message is a massive, necessary reevaluation of cause and effect.
Right.
The skills mismatch is a real phenomenon, but it is entirely secondary to the profound lack of structural demand for complex labor.
Exactly. And the overwhelming dominance of microfirms is not a sign of entrepreneurial health.
No, it is a symptom of a sick, informal economy masking a catastrophic missing middle.
And the low return on massive public investment isn't merely a failure of civil service project management.
It is a profound structural flaw in choosing to build isolated hardware without cultivating the software of domestic linkages and capability building.
The true, proven path forward requires selective, structurally aligned industrial policy.
It requires the discipline of reciprocal control.
The willingness to let some rafts remain rafts.
And the courage to finally build the missing middle.
You know, the reason all of this matters to you, whether you work in macroeconomics or run a mid-sized business or are just trying to navigate the trajectory of your own career, is because these exact same analytical biases apply to our own lives.
They absolutely do.
We all possess a really dangerous tendency to misdiagnose our own problems by focusing on comfortable micro-level symptoms rather than confronting hard structural truths.
The comfort of the visible symptom is always more seductive than the complexity of the hidden structure.
It really is. It is so much easier to tell yourself, I just need to take one more online certification course, tweak my resume one more time, and I'll get that massive promotion.
Rather than admitting the terrifying structural truth that your entire industry is shrinking and the demand for your role is literally disappearing.
Exactly. It is infinitely easier to celebrate the exhausting hustle of working 3 different gig economy jobs than to recognize you are trapped in a low productivity cycle with no missing middle to climb up.
We want the clean break on the X-ray.
We want the simple diagnosis.
But the muddy waters hold the actual truth.
They do. So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you step back into your own ecosystem today. We've just spent an hour examining how an entire nation, complete with brilliant economists, massive budgets, and international advisors, can be completely paralyzed by comforting, emotionally attractive narratives.
They bought into the romance of the solo entrepreneur.
And the illusion that simply going to school magically generates a high-paying job out of thin air. If millions of people and billions of dollars can be so easily misdirected by a good story, what comforting narratives are you currently relying on in your own career or your own business? What micro-symptoms are you obsessing over that might be hiding a massive structural missing middle right beneath your feet? Think about it.